morning, everybody. Yesterday, I was a little concerned about my outfit. I'm like, I don't know if I can preach in a flannel and jeans. And then I remember last week, okay, Eric, he just had a T-shirt on. And then 2 weeks ago, Nick was preaching in a ghost costume. So I figure, lumberjack costumes are right for this week. Somebody was actually saying I kind of look like Al from Home Improvement with this outfit on. So I'm like, is that a compliment or not? I just need to bring in my tool belt or something. I don't know. So in my opinion, the biggest reveal in cinema history occurred on, technology fail, occurred on May 21st of 1980, but it also happened a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Luke Skywalker, he's training to be a Jedi Knight in the swamps of Dagobah with Master Yoda, and he receives this vision of his friends in mortal danger. So he takes off and heads to Cloud City, and he falls into the trap of his nemesis, Darth Vader. After a very climactic battle, Luke finds himself disarmed in every sense of the word. And he is backed onto this narrow ledge over this seemingly bottomless abyss, and he accuses Vader of the ultimate treachery. You killed my father. And Vader says, no, I'm your father. So, in my opinion, the biggest reveal in cinematic history. But right now we're in week 8 of our Mark series. We're doing a chapter each week, and this is the Gospel of Mark has 16 chapters in it. So we are right in the middle of the action. And you may not know it, but Mark chapter 8 has an even bigger reveal than that of Darth Vader being Luke's father. Are you guys ready? Do you want to hear the secret? Big surprise here. Jesus is the Christ. I had my line said no gasps of surprise, no shock and awe, but one gasp. One gasp. So thank you. I appreciate that. Most of you are thinking, no, of course not. Why would that be a surprise? That's the dude's name, Jesus Christ. First name Jesus, last name Christ. Okay, that is how we commonly treat his name. But Christ or Messiah, depending on which translation you're reading, it's a title. It literally means anointed one. So Jesus Christ. So Jesus, he is the Christ, the anointed one, and that there's a lot deeper meaning there, though, than just anointed one. That was the term that people used for the person that was coming to save everyone, to usher in God's new kingdom. That is what Christ meant. It was a very, very big word, Christ and Messiah. One is a Hebrew word, one is a Greek word, and you'll actually see that if you have your Mark journals, that is on the bottom of page 50. It explains that in a little more detail. If you don't have a copy of the Mark journals, there are more in the back. I would welcome you to go grab one while you're here. I'm skipping ahead. Mark 1:1 actually is the first instance of Jesus being called the Christ, but it's not talking to people in the story. It's talking to us. It's a narrator whispering the secret. Hey, this is what this book is about. Mark 1:1, this is the good news about Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. So Jesus is called the Christ or the Messiah in the first verse, but he's not referred to in that way until the end of chapter 8 in the big reveal. He is called Jesus of Nazareth. He's called teacher. He is called carpenter. He's even called prophet sometimes, but he's never referred to as Christ until we get to the middle of the book, chapter 8. Mike read the main text for today, and Jesus posed 2 questions in the beginning of that text. One was, who do people say that I am? And who do you say that I am? That's what I'm going to focus the message on today. Who do people say that I am, and who do you say that I am? That second question, if you have your journals, highlight it, underline it, do whatever you need to do. That may be the most important question that you ever have to consider. We're jumping ahead then. I guess I'm getting booed off the stage. I don't know. So I'm gonna read verses 27 and 28. I'm looking for the shepherd hook to just. So I'm going to read 27 and 28 again. Jesus and his disciples left Galilee and went up to the villages near Caesarea Philippi. As he was walking, he asked them, "Who do the people say that I am?" Well, they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others say that you're one of the other prophets," which is interesting. The answers they got were, the answers that the disciples gave Jesus were all very similar. They had John the Baptist, Elijah, a prophet. All three of those are kind of the same, because John the Baptist was a prophet, Elijah was a prophet, and prophets are prophets. But why did people specifically name these people? Why did they name Jesus a prophet? Is that accurate? Let me pause for a second. What is a prophet? I think a good definition for it would be someone who speaks on God's behalf and with his authority. A lot of times we think of a prophet as, predicting the future, and sometimes that did happen, but more often than not, what a prophet did was call the people to turn back to God. And that is exactly what Jesus was about. He was sent to call people back to God. And he actually referred to himself as a prophet. We can read that in Mark chapter 6, verse 4. Jesus was returning to his hometown Nazareth, and he was preaching to them, and he did a few miracles there, but they were not treating him respectfully, and they didn't have a lot of faith in him. It says, Jesus told them, "A prophet is honored everywhere except his own hometown and among his own relatives and family." So Jesus did essentially say, "Yes, I am a prophet," but that is a very small part of who he is. They referred to him as John the Baptist. Why would they name him John the Baptist? Well, John the Baptist was a cousin of his, and maybe they had a little family resemblance. A lot of the messages that they were saying were the same, calling people to repentance. The way they spoke to authority figures was very similar. If people in church were not doing their job, Jesus would call them out. John the Baptist called them out, and he was actually imprisoned for that. Something else interesting about John the Baptist is in the Gospel of Luke, John the Baptist is described as coming in the spirit and power of Elijah, which Elijah, that is the other thing that people call Jesus. So why were they calling him Elijah? Elijah was a prophet from almost 1,000 years before Jesus' time. Elijah, like Jesus, he performed miracles, and he was also one that was willing to speak out and say hard truths to people in authority, people that were being unjust, unfair. So there were some similarities there. But also, a lot of people would have been remembering a prophecy written in Malachi. Let me read that for you here. Malachi chapter 4, verses 5 and 6 says, "Look, I'm sending you the prophet Elijah before the great and dreadful day of the Lord arrives. His preaching will turn the hearts of fathers to their children and the hearts of children to their fathers." Now, the day of the Lord, that was a way that a lot of prophets in the Old Testament referred to when the Messiah would come, when he would come to usher in God's kingdom. So the people calling Jesus Elijah 2.0, that shows that they were anticipating the Messiah. They were ready for him. They were like, "Come on, bring on the Messiah. We're ready." They're ready for the Messiah or the Christ. But the crowds didn't want to call Jesus Christ. They did not want to name him the Christ yet. And this is my personal opinion, but I imagine it's for one of two reasons, probably both for some people. Jesus was not doing what they expected the Messiah to do. He wasn't rounding up soldiers to start a war against Rome. He was not starting fights. He was not a big, tough, scary guy. He was calling people to love each other and forgive each other. And this is not what they were expecting. This is not what they were wanting the Messiah to do. They wanted to overthrow Rome because those were the big bad guys. So either they didn't call him Christ because he wasn't doing what they expected Christ to do, or because they were afraid of the people in charge. Most of the Jewish authorities, they weren't big fans of Jesus. They're plotting to have him killed. They have multiple attempts before they eventually do have him killed. And then the Romans, the people over that, they would not have treated a Messiah well, and they would have punished any of his supporters very severely. Roman punishment was known for being swift and very brutal. So the common people of that time were either too confused or too afraid to say who Jesus was. But what if Jesus asked you today? He asked his disciples, who do people say that I am? What if he asked you today, who do people say that I am today? Not 2,000 years ago, but today, who do people say that I am? What if he was sitting right next to you and he looked over and said, what are people saying about me? What do your neighbors say about Jesus? What do your coworkers say about Jesus? What about classmates or friends on social media? What are common things people are saying about Jesus? I don't hear a lot of people saying like, oh, he's John the Baptist or Elijah anymore. They're saying different things. A common thing I hear is, oh, Jesus, he was a good teacher. He was a moral authority. He was able to teach the people. He's going out there and working with them, and he was just a kind of a good guy, a good teacher. Some people today still say that he's a prophet. Actually, I believe religion of Islam refers to Jesus. Oh, he was a prophet. Oh, he wasn't the Messiah, and he definitely wasn't God. But he was a prophet. He was a good guy. Some people say today that Jesus, he was just a magician or a con artist, and he was he's able to do cool things and entertain people, but he wasn't who he said he was. And some people today, they say that Jesus, he was just a myth. Never existed. There was never a person like that. And that's relatively common, but I think that's the silliest answer of all. There's too much historical evidence, too much data to just say that this person never even existed. I think H.G. Wells put it once. He was not a follower, but he called himself a historian. He described it like this: I'm a historian, not a believer, but I must confess that this penniless preacher from Nazareth is irrevocably the center of history. Jesus Christ is easily the most dominant figure in all of history. So maybe you don't agree with what he said, maybe you don't think he did everything he said, but it's undeniable that Jesus existed. He literally splits our calendar and our history into BC AD. This was a man who was there. Many of these answers that people today use to describe Jesus, there's an element of truth to that. He was a good teacher, but he was so much more than that. He was a prophet, but he was so much more than that. He was an important historical figure, but he was so much more than that. All these answers most of the answers are good, but incomplete. you have to decide for yourself who Jesus is to you. And Jesus asked his disciples directly. He asked them directly in Mark 8:29. That's on page 50 of your journals if you have it. This is what I want you to underline or highlight. But Jesus asked them, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter replied, "You're the Messiah, or the Christ." And he warned them not to tell anyone about him yet. With Peter, you never know what you're going to get. He was kind of the self-appointed spokesperson for the disciples. You are just as likely to get the great confession as you are to get an argument or get your ear chopped off. That's just who Peter was. He was very, very bold in what he said and what he did. The disciples heard what everybody was saying about him, but they had to form their own conclusions based on what they had seen and heard Jesus do during their time with him. Can you imagine being one of his disciples? Can you imagine what they had seen him do, what they had heard him say? What did they know about Jesus? Well, Jesus was the healer of the sick. He was the restorer of sight. He was the giver of life. He was the expeller of demons. He was a teacher. He was a storyteller. He was a friend of sinners and a rule breaker. He was a miracle worker. He was the ruler of the wind and waves. He was forgiver of sins, giver of authority, feeder of the hungry. And after walking on the water, they would have to decide that, yes, he is extremely buoyant. After everything that they had seen and heard Jesus do, how could they see him as anything other than the Christ or the Messiah? And I think that myself. After everything he did, how could he be anything else? And that's actually the same question Jesus is asking you today. The same question he asked his disciples 2,000 years ago. Today, he's asking you the same question. Who do you say that I am? Who do you say that Jesus is? C.S. Lewis says that you have three options, essentially. Historically, there's no question that Jesus existed. He was a man who walked on this earth. You have to decide, was what he said about himself true? There's three options we have. Either he was lying, he wasn't who he said he was crazy, he thought he was who he said he was, but he was just out of his mind, or he is who he says he is, he's Lord. So he's either a liar, he's a lunatic, or he's the Lord. Those are your three options. And it doesn't matter what your neighbor says, or your parents, or your spouse, or your friends, or your teachers or your preachers. It's something that you have to decide for yourself who he is. So is what he said about himself true? What did he say? He said that he was the Son of God. He said that he was the forgiver of sins. He said he was the giver of eternal life. He said that he is the great I am. He said he's the only way to God. So if any one of those things that he said wasn't true, he can't be a good teacher or moral authority. That is not an option. He's either a liar, he's a lunatic, or he's the Lord. So maybe what he said wasn't true. Maybe that's where you feel. But if what he says was true, what implications does that have for you and what you're doing and who you're following? What implications does that have for your life today? Jesus is asking you today, who do you say that I am? Do you say he's the Christ, the Messiah, the Lord of your life? Awesome. I'm so glad to hear that. And I'm sure for many of you in here, that's true. That's how you feel. Jesus is who he says he is, and I'm a follower and a believer, and I'm in that boat with you. Do you have doubts or questions right now? That's okay. That's okay. It's okay to have doubts and questions. I'm sure there are a number of people in this room today that, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. He seems interesting, but it's a lot to take in. John the Baptist, that's one of the people that they said Jesus, maybe he's John the Baptist. They both were doing awesome stuff. John the Baptist had doubts about Jesus. He had questions. He was put in prison for his convictions, and he started thinking, maybe I was wrong, maybe I was confused, maybe I didn't actually know who Jesus really was. Maybe you find yourself in that boat. Maybe your life is not going the way you expected it to right now. Maybe things aren't happening the way that you had planned your whole life. Maybe you are stuck in a job that you hate. Maybe there's financial issues, and at the end of the month when the bills are due, there's more month than money. Maybe some of your relationships aren't working the way that you wanted with your spouse, with your children, with your friends. Maybe there's an illness. Maybe you're sick, maybe a family or a friend is sick, and it's not looking good, and you have questions, and that's okay. It's okay to have questions. What did John do with his questions when he was in prison, when he was struggling? John sent two of his followers to go ask Jesus, "Are you the one to come, or should we expect someone else?" This is the same John that said, when he saw Jesus, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." This is the same John that baptized Jesus. The heavens opened, and he saw the Spirit of God come down and heard a voice that said, "This is my Son, whom I loved. In him I am well pleased." This is the same John who had questions during his sufferings. And it makes me think it's okay if we have questions too sometimes. And what did Jesus say to John's followers when they asked him? He told them, "Go tell John what you've seen and heard. The lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, and the poor have the good news preached to them." That was Jesus' response to Elijah. That response is interesting because if you look back in Isaiah, a lot of the prophecies mentioned about the coming Messiah, the coming Christ, Jesus is touching on those. Those are prophecies that he fulfilled with the miracles that he had done, with the things he had done and said on earth. He said, "Yes, this is me. Look and see what I've done." So if you're in that time of question, it's okay to be there. I would say to you, and sometimes I need to remind myself, it's okay to have questions. When you have questions, go back and see what Jesus has done. I would say get in his word and let it renew your faith. Look around you and see what Jesus has done in the lives of people that call him Lord. Is it easy? No, it's not always easy. Is it instantaneous? Usually it's not instantaneous, but with Jesus, better is possible. Last week, one of my dogs knocked over a box of stuff that I had not looked into for several years. There were some different papers, documents, pictures. I'm kind of messy. My wife will confirm that. So it wasn't very organized. But I was looking through and I saw different stuff. And this box was from a particularly difficult time in my life, a time where I felt in a very dark place and I couldn't see the way forward. But looking at there were some letters and some cards and some pictures in this box from that time. And at that time, I couldn't see what was happening. But here, looking back, I can see how God was using people in my life to help me get through a bad situation. God used those challenges to help me grow. I don't believe that God puts bad things in your life. But when bad things come, God can use them in surprising ways. God can use difficult things in surprising ways. Romans 8:28, I think, is very poignant here. It says, "And we know in all things that God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." God can work through the challenges. He can work through the doubts. He can work through the questions. He can work through the bad things if we let him. We all have good days and bad days. I have good days and bad days. Maybe some of you are riding high and good days every day. Please come tell me your secret after the service and share it with everyone else, because most of us have good days and bad days. Some days you know who Jesus is to you. You know the direction you're supposed to go. But then there's other days where you're not so sure, and you take Jesus out of the driver's seat and you say, "Hey, this is what I want to do. I think I know better." I think Peter, the Apostle Peter, I didn't think he had good days and bad days. It wasn't day to day. I think for him, it was kind of minute to minute. He gave this great confession. He told everybody, this is who Jesus is. He said, Jesus is the Christ. He is the Son of God. He is the Messiah. And that was a very accurate thing. But he put his foot in his mouth, like I do. He gives the great confession, and then a couple minutes later, he gets foot and mouth disease. I'm gonna read that passage again from Mark 8:31 through 33. Jesus began to tell them that the Son of Man must suffer many terrible things and be rejected by the elders, the leading priests, and the teachers of the religious law. He would be killed, but 3 days later he would rise from the dead. As he talked openly with his disciples, Peter took him aside and began to reprimand him for saying such things. Jesus turned around and looked at his disciples. Then he reprimanded Peter. "Get away from me, Satan." He said, "You're seeing things from a merely human point of view, not from God's point of view." Jesus was not saying or doing the things in this moment that Peter had expected. He followed Jesus. He's like, Jesus is a great guy. He's a teacher. He's a prophet. He's doing all this great stuff. But Peter was still expecting, all right, we're gonna take over the world by force. He was still in that train of thought. He's like, I don't think so, Tim. This isn't happening. But Jesus said, no. That's the opposite of why I came. I didn't come to take over the world by force. I came to take over the world with love. And we're not going to go out and kill people. No. My method of saving everyone is I'm going to be the one that dies. This is not what Peter expected. And in this, it's kind of a confusing verse sometimes. The word Satan, a lot of times we associate that with the devil or demons or something. What that word specifically means, especially in this time period, was opponent. So I don't think Jesus was saying like, oh, Peter, you're getting possessed by the devil. He's saying, your plans, what you're saying right now, that is the opposite of what I'm all about. This is the opposite of what needs to happen. This is the opposite of what I want to happen. I identify with Peter a little bit too much sometimes. And sometimes me, like Peter, I put Jesus in a box. Some of you probably feel the same way. You say, Jesus, I'm going to follow you, and then this is what you're going to do for me. I'm going to come to church on Sunday. I'll help out a little bit here and there, but the rest of the week, you are going to do things my way. But Jesus said, no. When you follow me, you don't change me. I change you, not the other way around. And then Jesus was actually able to use his reprimand of Peter as a jumping off point to teach the crowd what it really means to be his follower. And this is in 34 and 35. Then calling the crowd to join his disciples, he said, if any of you wants to be my follower, you have to give up your own way, take up your cross, and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you'll lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake and the sake of the good news, then you'll save it. If you choose to call him Christ, then you have to follow him his way. You have to put him first. You have to die to selfishness and live for him, live for other people. Always putting yourself first. Living for yourself only, that is a way to an unhappy, joyless life. But following Jesus, that's the way to bring light into your life and light into the lives of people around you. Jesus spent his entire ministry breaking down boxes that we made for the Messiah. This is who the Messiah is. This is what he's going to be. Jesus said, no, let me show you. Breaking down the boxes they put him in: teacher, prophet, magician. He said, some of this is part of who I am, but no, you don't fully understand yet. He broke down the boxes we put ourselves in, the boxes we make for us, the boxes we make for them, breaking down the barriers that we set up to keep others out. In Jesus' time, a common thought was, if you're poor or disabled or have problems in your life, it's because of something you did. It's because of something your parents did. But Jesus showed, no, you're allowed to have problems, and those are my opportunities to shine through your life if you let him. Jesus showed that God can use anybody. But what if I had a legion of demons in me? God can use you. What if I don't have much to give? God can still use you. What if I've made mistakes? What if I don't have the same abilities as everyone else? Whether you're young or old, rich or poor, male or female, Jesus has a place for you. He is wanting to tear down your boxes, tear down your barriers, and he wants to use you if you let him. Today, I want you to answer Jesus' question. Who do you say that I am? Who do you say that Jesus is? Who is he to you today? Was he telling the truth about himself? Or was he lying? Is he lying? Is he a lunatic? Or is he the Lord? And if he is the Messiah, if he is the Christ, if he is the Lord, what implications does that have for you? Because he can't just be a moral teacher. He can't just be a nice guy. He can't be one of these little pockets that we put him in. If you need to make a decision, today's the day to do it. And if you're not sure yet, if you have questions, if you have doubts, that's okay. I would still encourage you to come up and let somebody pray with you. It's okay to have questions. It's okay to have questions. There's going to be people up here that would love to pray with you. But if you've already made the decision to make Jesus the Lord of your life, I would still encourage you to think about what his role is in your life. Have you put him in a box and said, this is who you are, this is who you get to be, and this is who I am? Or will you let him come out of the box? You need to be sure that you're not trying to change him, but you're letting him to renew you. We put Jesus into boxes, into little compartments, and the Romans, they even tried to put Jesus in a box, but he broke out 3 days later. No box can keep him in. Every week at BCC, we remember him. We remember him with the Lord's Supper. There's these packets in the back. There's 2 tables. If you haven't got one, please stand up, go grab one. That's perfectly fine. I'm standing. You guys can stand too. This week, as we eat and drink, I'd like you to think about who Jesus is to you. And whether or not you call him Lord yet, I would encourage you to ask him to break down whatever barriers you still have, whatever boxes you're still putting him in, and mold him, let him mold you into what he knows that you should be. Let's take the bread, and it represents his body broken for us. And I want it to remind us today of the barriers that he's broken in our lives. And as we take the cup, this represents his blood. And I want you to let it wash you clean and renew your spirit.